The History of Poland Podcast, Episode 31, Crafty Prussians. Hello and welcome back. Last time, we left off with a cliffhanger. Bolesław the Curly has invaded Prussia, hoping to not only bring them further into the sphere of influence, think money and soldiers, but also to convert the pagan Prussians. This was part of a larger trend of Europe having crusading fever. The last we heard, the Prussians had, converted, I guess you could call it, but not really. It was completely a matter of convenience, which is what the Piast soon discovered. As Długosz tells us, quote, "The Prussians' insincere acceptance of Christianity, forced on them by Bolesław, lasts less than a year. The Prussians have never been accustomed to bowing their proud necks to the yoke of any faith, so now they begin divesting themselves of that of Christianity, so recently assumed, and return to their old pagan rites. The priests and servants of God, whom Bolesław left to educate them, are sent back to Poland, and told never to return under pain of death. At the same time, lest Bolesław declare war on them again, they sent envoys to him with gifts and the tribute due. In an attempt to justify their apostasy and avoid another war, they beg Bolesław not to hold it against them, for they do find the Christian faith too arduous, and it is difficult for them to abandon the gods of their fathers, whom they have honored for so long, or to give up making the sacrifices that they have been accustomed to make. They are not refusing submission and loyalty to Bolesław in Poland, and will pay the tribute asked. But in return they ask that they be allowed to retain their old customs and rituals, assuring Bolesław that they will honorably pay the tribute imposed on them, take part in wars on his side, and loyally and sincerely obey all his commands, except the acceptance of Christianity. At the same time, they threaten that should they be forced to live according to Polish Christian ways, and not those of their fathers, they will have to break loose from his authority. Bolesław, whether influenced by their arguments or their gifts, gives in all too easily, and accepts this dreadful crime of apostasy. He shows no eagerness to punish it or to end it, but appears indifferent and unconcerned. So the Prussian envoys are dismissed with his tacit acceptance of the revolt and apostasy, and no attempt is made to punish them." End quote. Turns out that Bolesław was more into the material gains than the gains on behalf of the church. Now, as far as I've been able to discover, there aren't any documents dealing with Bolesław's motivations for rolling over so easily. But I can't help but think that the recent wars in Pomerania must have played a role in informing his worldview. Those wars took years upon years, took a major logistical commitment from the Polish state and the combined forces of all of Poland. While it is true that Bolesław was the senior brother of Poland, he didn't have the absolute authority that his dad did, nor did he have the same proven martial ability as his dad. It's my personal speculation, but it could have just been that Bolesław saw Prussia as more trouble than it was worth and took the consolation prize of tribute and a pagan ally. Of course, that's not really how things turned out. In 1166, we hear from Długosz that the Prussians go back on their word more completely. Długosz tells us that, quote, "The Prussians now go on to break faith in temporal matters, discarding the yoke of subjugation and bondage. Not only do they refuse to pay taxes and tribute, but they injure some of the starosta, whose duty it was to collect such dues, even going so far as to kill some and forcibly expel others from the country. Not content with this, they assemble a considerable army of both peasants and nobles, and swiftly invade the lands of Chełmno and Mazovia, neither of which has been anticipating any such move. After devastating many villages and towns, the Prussians collect a great booty of cattle and whatever else has whetted their appetite, slaughter people, and carry off many more into captivity. When Bolesław learns of this, he hurriedly gets a scratch force together and sets off to liberate the country. When told that the enemy has retreated with its booty into its fastnesses, he is dreadfully upset and does not know what to do. Should he pursue the enemy into the forests and marshes, or give up? He can see the sense of waiting until later before dealing with the Prussians, especially as his force is much too small to be sure of being safe from an enemy more accustomed to subterfuge than armed conflict. So, leaving garrisons in many sites guarding tributaries to the river Osa, so as to prevent the Prussians making unexpected raids, he returns home and there proclaims a full-scale expedition against the Prussians." End quote. The full-scale invasion of Prussia begins the next year. Długosz tells us that, quote, "All arrangements for war on the Prussians having been made, at the onset of summer, Bolesław the Curly's army, all the larger since the country is not under threat from any of its neighbors, advances into Prussia. Bolesław has been joined by two of his brothers, Henry and Mieszko, whose territories have also suffered from Prussian raids. Such extensive preparations could not be kept hidden from the Prussians, who, seeing themselves faced with defeat and some great punishment, decide to have recourse to cunning and deceit. Here they are at an advantage, since there are in the Polish army 4 Prussian deserters, who over the years have won the sympathy and favor of Bolesław, and who, once the army is in enemy territory, act as the army's guide, choose the campsites, decide the route the army is to take, what places are accessible, and what to be avoided. In fact, the entire conduct of the advance is left to them. These four the enemy succeeds in bribing with lavish gifts and even more generous promises, also by reminding them that this is their home and their people, and that what is at stake is not just the avoidance of submission, but Prussia's complete destruction. They must remember, they are told, that they were not born in Poland, but in Prussia, where their ancestors lived and their relatives still live. They alone can prevent their country's downfall. The four let themselves be persuaded and agree to betray the Polish army, which has already penetrated deep into the interior, burning as it goes, intending to continue thus into the farthest reaches of the country." End quote. This situation is getting tense. The Poles are marching into a land that they do not control, burning a path as they go along. They are stretched out, and the people who are guiding them turn out to be betraying them. I don't know if it's just me, and it probably is, but it reminds me a lot of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where the Roman legions marching into Germany were betrayed by Arminius. Not a point-for-point parallel, but it still sticks out to me. And for those who know Roman history, that'll provide some foreshadowing about what's about to happen. Długosz continues, saying, quote, "The four deserters are with the forward units, which are under the command of Duke Henry of Sandomierz, and these they now lead into trackless forest. Behind them comes the second rank under Duke Mieszko of Wielkopolska with Bolesław and the cream of knights well in the rear. They have to cross ravines, forest fastnesses, and finally emerge into the area of marsh, bog, and quagmire, where everything is slippery because of incessant rain, and the only grass is that which covers the surface of what is a bottomless pit. The four traders encourage the marchers by saying that once through this difficult stretch they will find a populous area with lots of cattle. Then, when the forward units are jammed in a narrow defile, the Prussians emerge from their hiding places and shoot at them from a distance without themselves coming under attack. Unable to advance or retreat, the Poles flounder in the bog, and those who do not drown are picked off by the Prussian archers. Henry, who is in the first line, receives several wounds and dies along with many of his knights, while those behind press forward in a frenzy and are killed themselves by the Prussian spears and javelins, for the Prussians are now in front and behind and on either side, but a worse peril than their spears and javelins is the bog. The number of those who, burdened with armor, sink in and are swallowed by the mud is greater than that of those actually killed. Still the Poles in the rear come on, climbing over the bodies of the dead and fighting until they too fall. Almost the entire flower of Polish chivalry falls here, and their banners are gathered up by the enemy. The body of the Duke of Sandomierz, shamefully stripped of its badges and rank, is swallowed by the bog, along with those of many others. Bolesław and Mieszko both survive, and with the remnants of the army return to Poland, desperate with grief. Now and for many years, the laments and recriminations of the wives and friends of the dead continued to be heard. It is difficult to say how many excellent young men, veteran soldiers and horses, or how much armor, what wealth, was engulfed in this disaster for the Poles and victory for the Prussians, which these of course attribute to their old gods and sacrilegious beliefs." End quote. So that's disastrous. Henry is dead, which leaves the balance of power in Poland suddenly very much out of balance. Not to mention that the military defeat is a body blow to Poland at a time when it's not especially strong. Długosz continues on, telling us of the aftermath of this terrible defeat. Quote, "The disaster suffered in Prussia plunges Poland into a depression that is to last for a long time. An ugly, glum silence prevails, for people are so ashamed of the wretched conduct of the war. There is hardly a house in the country that does not mourn a brother or a relative. People close their ears to words of comfort. Then Bolesław and Mieszko summon an assembly of the country's prelates and barons to decide what is to be done with Sandomierz, since Henry, being unmarried, has left no heir. After much discussion, it is decided that Bolesław the Wrymouth's fifth son, Casimir, who has left nothing in his father's will and is now a man of over 30, should take over the vacant duchy. Hitherto he had been living off the generosity of Bolesław, who now complains of the heavy demands being made on him by the government of the country. So Bolesław is granted for his lifetime the greater part of the duchy of Sandomierz, the town itself, its tolls and the dues of the territories belonging to it, with Casimir having the reversion after his death. Then, giving way to pressure from his brothers and the more influential men in the duchy, Casimir marries Helena, daughter of Zvezvolad, Duke of Buez, a girl of Ruthenian origin. In view of the recent disaster, the wedding is celebrated without great ceremony." End quote. So, things are not going well for the Poles. Their military might is being severely diminished, the balance of power is being shifted onto a new triumvirate, and the situation domestically isn't particularly stable. These variables conspire to foment rebellion and attempted rebellion. Długosz tells us of two events. The first involved the sons of Władysław II, the second involving some upstart nobles. Długosz tells us that, quote, "The wounds of the Prussian disaster have scarcely begun to heal before Bolesław has a fresh war on his hands. His nephews, Bolesław the Tall, Mieszko, and Konrad the Flat-footed, to whom he had given Silesia when they returned from exile, now take up arms against him in an attempt to avenge the injuries suffered by their father and recover the lands left them in their father's will. First, they devastate Poznan. Bolesław, well aware that he has no army left and can scarcely hope to persuade others to do military service, sees that he must negotiate peace, so the prelates and his lay advisors arrange for the two sides to meet. Bolesław starts by questioning the reason for their declaration of war, arguing that the Principality of Krakow was never part of anyone's share, but legally can only be inherited by the monarch, and thus, on his father's death, the right to it passed to him as the eldest son and elected monarch. The towns in Silesia that Bolesław retained as a symbol of his supreme authority as monarch he kept legitimately to offset the burden of the cost of government, which fell on him. Part of the Duchy of Sandomierz, Lublin, he says belongs solely to Casimir, who till then had enjoyed no inheritance from his father. In the opinion of the assembled councillors, Bolesław's arguments outweigh the complaints of his nephews, and it is agreed that the war on which these have embarked is not justified. Nevertheless, to placate his nephews, Bolesław agrees to surrender the towns he holds in Silesia and allow them to be divided among his nephews. End quote. So, that's one rebellion, but focusing on the upstart nobles, Długosz tells us that, quote, 2 knights, Jaksa and Sviatoslav, as well as nearly all the leaders in the Duchy of Krakow, now dislike the rule of Bolesław the Curly, whom they consider to be less zealous for the good of the country than he should be, and whom they blame for many of its misfortunes. They now conspire to remove him. In their opinion, the duchy and the monarchy should go to Casimir, whose unusual integrity they admire, and also because, if this happens, they will not have Mieszko forced upon them as king when Bolesław dies, which they expect to happen soon since they consider him exhausted by age. So they exhort Casimir to accept the government and so avoid the country going from bad to worse. Because of Bolesław's sloth and neglect, but Casimir feels that it would be ugly and unjust to expel his aging brother, who in his youth had been his kind and generous guardian, and, still more important, had done his country great service. He will not countenance anything so disgraceful, and talk of rebellion dies out. End quote. Bolesław holds on to power despite these objections to his authority, but you can already see the fractures plaguing the Polish state worsen. The issue of noble autonomy remains at the forefront, inter-Piast squabbles are causing issues, and the threat of foreign interference continues to remain an issue. It's been 30 years since Bolesław III passed away, but already the Polish state has severely weakened. In 1172 and again in 1173, the Polish state is hit by 2 more blows. First, by the early death of Bolesław the Curly's eldest son. The grief of this was apparently so terrible that it led to the second death, that of Bolesław the Curly. Długosz tells us that, quote, the passage of time rather than reason heals the pain of the death of Bolesław's son. Now a sudden languor makes Bolesław himself take to his bed. When he realizes that his state is deteriorating, he sends for his youngest brother, Casimir, the prelates and the barons of the kingdom, and distributes his estates, possessions, and valuables. The duchies of Mazovia and Kujawia he grants to Leszek, his only surviving son. He appoints his brother, Duke Casimir, guardian of his son and wife, begging him in his turn to give them the same protection as he had received in his childhood. His valuables and jewels he divides between his wife Maria, Casimir of Sandomierz, and his son, Leszek. Then, having received the sacrament, he dies on October 30th, having ruled Poland for 29 years. After Poland's death, Mieszko of Wielkopolska and Pomerania, Casimir of Sandomierz, and Bolesław, Mieszko, and Konrad, the Dukes of Silesia, all being family members, hold an assembly in Krakow to decide on the new ruler. The Krakowians favor Casimir of Sandomierz, but yield to the insistence of those who want Mieszko the Old, Duke of Wielkopolska and Pomerania, who is duly elected prince and ruler, whereupon the castle, city, and surrounding country of Krakow are handed over to him. End quote. We'll pick up with Mieszko the Old next time, and see that his rule is not especially well received by the people. But I don't want to spoil anything, so you'll have to stay tuned. Before I wrap up with Bolesław the Curly, though, I do want to say something about him. Most of my focus has been on his military exploits, relationships with his brothers and nephews, foreign relations, etc. But being a ruler at this time is about more than just the headlines. There are the small things too, things that are often overlooked. To give you a fuller picture of what life was like for the senior Duke of Poland at the time, I'd like to draw your attention to an anecdote that Długosz included in his work. He said, quote, on October 10th, the Bishop of Krakow, Matthew, dies. He had always been a lover of feasting and ostentation, and it is said that, once, when Bolesław sent officials to ask him for financial help, the bishop ordered them to be shown the episcopal privy, saying that that was where they should seek such treasure as he had, meaning that all his income as a bishop had gone to food, so that it was useless to ask him for money. End quote. Which I love. I love that Bolesław is involved in matters of importance, needs some financial assistance, and when his men get there, they are shown a toilet. Not everything Bolesław, or really any of the Piast rulers, had to deal with was glamorous. With that, I'll say goodbye. As I frequently remind you, if you like the show, you can support it by going to patreon.com/History of Poland podcast. There are exclusive miniseries, history rants available, and an upcoming daily history podcast you can support the creation of. If you don't have the change to spare, you can support the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, sending me notes of encouragement or complaint via email to historyofpolandpodcast@gmail.com, or by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. Until next time.